The moment Anakin Skywalker murdered the Tusken Raiders in Attack of the Clones was a significant one, a pivotal moment that marked the beginning of his transformation into the dark figure he would later become. In the original timeline, Anakin was deeply disturbed by his actions, and his guilt and inner conflict played a major role in his eventual turn to the dark side. But what if, instead of feeling guilty and remorseful, Anakin embraced the darkness immediately after killing the Tusken Raiders? What if, after his slaughter of an entire Tusken village, Anakin was exiled from the Jedi Order, unable to return to the fold after committing such an atrocity? In this scenario, Anakin would become a tool of the Sith, a nameless assassin who operated in the shadows, feared across the galaxy for his unparalleled power. He would become a specter, a ghost, a whisper on the wind, leaving no trace of his presence until the dark day of Order 66. Anakin's descent into darkness after the murder of the Tuskens would be a pivotal shift in the story of the Clone Wars. Instead of being a Jedi Knight caught between his duty and his emotions, Anakin would fully embrace the power of the dark side, choosing to turn his back on the Jedi Order and its teachings. The slaughter of the Tuskens would be the breaking point. He would no longer see himself as a servant of the Force, but as someone who could shape it to his will. His emotions, once controlled by the Jedi Code, would now fuel his every action. Anakin would be consumed with hatred, anger, and a thirst for power, seeking to impose his will upon the galaxy. The Jedi Council would be forced to act swiftly. Anakin's actions would be seen as a grave violation of the Jedi Code, a line that no Jedi should ever cross. The Order, already wary of Anakin's emotional instability, would no longer have the luxury of tolerance. With the Tusken Raider massacre, Anakin would be branded a threat. He would be exiled from the Jedi Order, his connection to the Force cast aside as the Council debated whether to act on the growing fear that he was a dangerous force that could never be controlled. Anakin, now alone and embittered, would reject the Council's condemnation. He would abandon the Jedi, leaving the Republic and all its ideals behind in favor of embracing the dark side fully. It would not be long before Count Dooku, the former Jedi Master turned Sith Lord, took notice of Anakin's newfound power. Dooku, working as the right hand of Darth Sidious, had long been searching for a powerful warrior who could serve the Sith cause without the constraints of the Jedi Code. Anakin's raw power, combined with his deep rage, made him a perfect candidate to serve the Sith's grand design. Dooku, understanding the gravity of Anakin's potential, would approach him with an offer. He would entice Anakin with the power he sought, the ability to overthrow the Jedi and the Republic, and a promise of strength beyond what he had ever known. At first, Anakin would resist Dooku's offer. He had already turned his back on the Jedi, but the idea of becoming a full-fledged Sith was still new to him. However, Dooku's words would chip away at Anakin's doubts. The idea of unlimited power, the chance to save Padmé from death, and the ability to reshape the galaxy into a new order would be too tempting. Palpatine, through his dark manipulations, would also fan the flames of Anakin's ambition, encouraging him to embrace his full potential. The Sith would promise him everything: power, control, the ability to control life and death, and the opportunity to destroy those who had wronged him. Slowly but surely, Anakin would give in to the dark side, his mind no longer burdened by doubt. From that moment on, Anakin would become a nameless assassin for the Sith. His role would be to eliminate key figures within the Republic and the Jedi Order, sowing chaos throughout the galaxy as the Clone Wars raged on. No longer would he serve as a Jedi Knight or a general in the Grand Army of the Republic. Instead, he would be a shadow, operating outside the law, carrying out Dooku's and Sidious's orders with ruthless efficiency. His power would grow, his mastery over the dark side increasing with each mission he undertook. He would be known to only a few, those few who dared to call him by name, but even then, his name would carry the weight of fear and terror. To the rest of the galaxy, he would be a ghost, a whisper, a fleeting legend that struck fear into the hearts of those who dared to fight against the Sith. Anakin's reputation as a more powerful foe than any Force wielder would quickly spread. He would move across the galaxy, infiltrating the heart of the Republic and the Separatists alike, eliminating targets with surgical precision. The Jedi, despite their best efforts, would be unable to track him down. His connection to the Force would allow him to remain hidden in plain sight, a specter of death who struck without warning. He would use his abilities to remain unseen, his mastery of the dark side making him virtually invisible to those who hunted him. In the few rare instances where he allowed his presence to be known, it would be too late. His enemies would fall without knowing what hit them, leaving no trace of his existence. To the Jedi, Anakin would become a myth, a ghost that they could never seem to catch. They would know of his power, but they would be powerless to stop him. They would try to track him down, sending their most skilled Jedi to hunt him, but each attempt would end in failure. Anakin's presence in the Force would become a distortion, a black hole that absorbed all attempts to locate him. He would use his mastery over the dark side to cloud his own presence, leaving no trace of his actions behind. His reputation as a shadow, a force of nature that could not be stopped, would grow. Throughout the Clone Wars, Anakin would be the Sith's most valuable weapon. While Dooku and Sidious focused on their larger schemes, Anakin would work in the shadows, executing their will with a deadly efficiency that left entire systems in chaos. The Republic would fall into disarray as key leaders and military commanders were assassinated, their deaths blamed on the Separatists or the Jedi. Anakin would manipulate events from behind the scenes, pushing the war toward an end that favored the Sith. The Jedi, still unaware of the true extent of Anakin's fall, would struggle to understand the growing threat they faced. Their inability to track Anakin down would create a sense of helplessness within their ranks. They would be forced to confront the reality that their greatest asset, the Chosen One, had become their greatest enemy. It would be a devastating blow to their morale, as they realized that Anakin's power was not only beyond their reach, but was actively being used to destroy them. In this timeline, Padmé Amidala would also be caught in the crossfire. Anakin's love for her, once pure and passionate, would become twisted as his fall deepened. He would still desire to save her from death, but instead of seeking out ways to protect her in a selfless manner, he would become consumed with the idea of controlling her. His need for power, his desire to reshape the galaxy, would overshadow his love for her, and he would begin to manipulate Padmé to his will. She would be torn between the man she loved and the monster he was becoming. In this version, Anakin would not hesitate to use her as a pawn in his quest for ultimate control, something that would drive a wedge between them that could never be repaired. As the Clone Wars continued, Anakin would grow more powerful, more dangerous, and more distant from the person he once was. He would no longer be the hopeful young man who had dreamed of peace and justice. Instead, he would become a harbinger of destruction, a force of nature that left nothing but ruin in his wake. The Republic, the Jedi, and even the Sith would be unable to contain him. Anakin would become a dark legend, a shadow that moved through the galaxy, feared by all but seen by none. But the true culmination of Anakin's transformation would come with the execution of Order 66. When Sidious finally gives the command, Anakin, once the Jedi's greatest hope, would strike the final blow to their order. By this point, Anakin would no longer be a Jedi or even a Sith. He would be something beyond, both an entity of pure darkness, his existence no longer tied to the material world. His power would be unmatched, his influence stretching across the galaxy like a tidal wave of destruction. His name would be forgotten, but his presence would linger long after his deeds had been done. Anakin's story, from his fall to his final act of betrayal, would forever alter the galaxy. His transformation into a nameless, ghostly assassin would not only change the course of the Clone Wars, but would set the stage for the rise of the Empire in a way no one could have predicted. The Jedi, powerless to stop him, would fall, and the Sith would emerge victorious, but not without their own consequences. Anakin, in his quest for ultimate power, would become the architect of his own undoing, leaving behind a galaxy that would never be the same again. The transformation of Anakin Skywalker into a dark specter, a ghost in the shadows, would set the stage for a much darker and quicker fall of the Republic, but it would also shape the very fabric of galactic history. With each assassination, with each dark whisper that rippled through the galaxy, Anakin would become more of a legend than a person, a powerful, unnamed force who could not be tracked, who could not be contained. The Jedi, aware of his potential but unable to track him down, would face a crisis of belief. Their greatest hope, the Chosen One, had now become their greatest enemy, and their failure to stop him would erode their confidence in their ability to preserve peace and justice across the galaxy. The Jedi's inability to locate Anakin would lead them to begin questioning the nature of their order itself. They had long relied on the Force to guide them, but they were now facing a being who had mastered the dark side so completely that they could not sense him. They were left in the dark, not only about Anakin's whereabouts but also about his true nature. The more they searched, the more they were confronted with failure. They would send their best trackers and most powerful Jedi Masters to find him, but each attempt would come to nothing. Anakin's mastery over the Force allowed him to hide, to vanish in plain sight, as if he were nothing more than a shadow slipping through their fingers. To the galaxy, Anakin's name would become a whispered legend, told in hushed tones in the darkest corners of the galaxy. His feats of assassination, carried out with unparalleled precision, would strike fear into the hearts of leaders, both within the Republic and the Separatists. While Dooku and Sidious worked on a larger scale, Anakin would become the hand of death, executing the will of the Sith without hesitation. His reputation would precede him wherever he went, and his mere presence would signal doom. He would be the force that changed the course of battles, not through armies or fleets, but through his presence as a singular, powerful assassin. Despite Anakin's increasing power, his isolation would take its toll. Though he was no longer bound by the Jedi Code, and no longer a part of the Republic or the Separatists, he was still a product of both. The darkness he had embraced had warped his mind, twisting his once pure intentions into something darker. He had sought power to protect Padmé and bring balance to the galaxy, but in his pursuit of control, he had lost himself. The love he once felt for Padmé would turn into an obsession, as he sought to bend her will to his own and secure her place by his side, even if it meant breaking her spirit. Padmé, meanwhile, would feel the pull of Anakin's darkness. She would not understand why he had turned against the Jedi, why he had become so distant and dangerous. The Anakin she had known was a man of compassion and hope, someone who dreamed of peace. But the Anakin who emerged from the shadow of the Tusken Raider massacre was a man driven by anger, revenge, and a twisted desire to control everything around him. Padmé, caught in the middle of this transformation, would struggle to hold on to the man she had once loved. She would sense the darkness inside him, but her hope for the man she once knew would keep her from fully accepting the reality of his change. Though Anakin's new role as a Sith assassin made him an invaluable asset to the Sith, he would be a loose cannon. His increasing instability would be a constant threat to Sidious and Dooku as they sought to maintain their hold on the galaxy. While Dooku, with his calm and calculating demeanor, served as a steady hand for the Sith cause, Anakin was wild, untamable, and unpredictable. His power, while unmatched, was dangerous in its unpredictability. Dooku and Sidious would seek to control him, to keep him in check, but as the years of the Clone Wars dragged on, they would find that the more they tried to control Anakin, the more he slipped from their grasp. Anakin's growing disillusionment with the Sith, however, would add another layer of complexity to the story. Sidious had always been manipulative, always pulling the strings behind the scenes, but Anakin, as he grew in power, would begin to question his master's true intentions. The promises that had once seduced him, power, control, the ability to save Padmé, had become hollow. Anakin would begin to see Sidious not as a mentor, but as a master who had used him, much as the Jedi had. He would see the Sith as just another group of manipulators, using him as a tool in their greater game. Though he had embraced the dark side, he was no longer completely under Sidious's thumb. His need for power had become something of a consuming obsession, and his quest to shape the galaxy would grow ever more personal. The myth of Anakin the nameless assassin who haunted the galaxy would continue to grow. The Jedi, with all their resources and the full weight of the Republic's military, would be unable to track him down. Every attempt they made to capture or eliminate him would end in failure. His presence in the Force would be a blur, a distortion that they could not interpret, and his mastery of stealth and assassination would make him a ghost. Even when his attacks became more brazen, when he sought to eliminate key leaders within the Separatist alliance, his presence would remain a mystery. The Republic's military would face a growing tide of chaos as Anakin, like a shadowy specter, cut down their most valuable assets, leaving no trace of his involvement. The Jedi, who had once relied on Anakin as their greatest hope, would begin to fracture under the pressure of the Clone Wars. Their faith in the Force and their ability to combat the darkness would be severely tested. They could no longer rely on their strength in the Force to guide them. Anakin had proven that even the strongest Jedi could be turned and lost. Their moral compass would become confused. as they could no longer fully trust in the very thing they had once used to guide them through life. The loss of their greatest warrior, Anakin, would signal the beginning of the end for the Jedi Order, as they realized that they were not invincible. Despite his growing disillusionment with the Sith, Anakin's fall into darkness would be irreversible. He would remain the Jedi's greatest enemy, not just because of his power, but because of the complexity of his betrayal. He had turned his back on everything he once stood for, and now, instead of seeking redemption or even understanding, he sought control. He would become the force that broke the galaxy, pushing it to the brink of destruction. In this alternate timeline, the true horror of Anakin's fall would become clear only with the execution of Order 66. Sidious, having manipulated the galaxy into chaos with the Clone Wars, would use his final weapon, Anakin, to eliminate the Jedi once and for all. Anakin, in his twisted version of loyalty to Sidious, would hunt down the Jedi with a ferocity unmatched by anything the galaxy had seen. But unlike the original timeline, where the Jedi were struck down by the clones, Anakin would be the harbinger of their extinction. His power would be felt in every corner of the galaxy as he wiped out the last remnants of the Jedi Order. But in the end, Anakin would be left as nothing more than a shadow. His power would be undeniable, but it would come at a great cost. He would lose everything: Padmé, his connection to the Force, and his very humanity. His quest for control would have stripped him of the very thing he had once sought to protect: balance. The galaxy would fall under the iron grip of the Sith, but it would be a hollow victory. Anakin, once the galaxy's greatest hope, would become a broken, corrupted ghost, a whisper in the Force that could never be silenced. His story would end not with redemption, but with the full realization that the darkness he had embraced had consumed him completely. As Anakin Skywalker's story in this altered timeline unfolded, the full weight of his choices would be felt throughout the galaxy. His descent into darkness, initiated by the massacre of the Tusken Raiders, would create a rift not only within the Jedi Order but within himself. No longer bound by the constraints of the Jedi Code, Anakin would grow further detached from the ideals he once held dear. His connection to Padmé, once the anchor to his humanity, would transform into an obsession, something he could no longer control. Instead of protecting her, as he had hoped, Anakin would begin to impose his will upon her, demanding loyalty and control. Padmé would find herself caught between her own love for Anakin and her growing fear of the monster he was becoming. As the wars raged on, her once undying faith in Anakin would be tested by his increasingly erratic behavior and violent tendencies. The man who had promised to protect her now seemed like a shadow of that person, consumed by his need for power and control. Every time Anakin took a life, every time he imposed his dark will on the galaxy, Padmé would feel the distance between them grow. She would see the man she loved slipping away, and no matter how hard she tried, there would be no way to bring him back. The Senate, too, would feel the ripple effects of Anakin's transformation. Once a hero of the Republic, his fall would be a loss to the ideals the Republic had been built upon. His power, once a symbol of hope, would become a weapon that could no longer be ignored. The Jedi Council, despite their attempts to track him down, would be utterly powerless to stop Anakin's rampage. His ability to move through the galaxy as a ghost, unseen and undetectable, would make him a menace no one could prepare for. The Jedi, no matter how much they delved into the Force, could not track him, for Anakin's mastery of the dark side had made him a specter, his connection to the Force a distortion, a blip that only those attuned to the darkness could feel. As the Clone Wars ground on, Anakin's role as a nameless assassin would become more pronounced. Dooku and Sidious would recognize that he was more than just a tool. They would see in him a force of destruction, something beyond a mere pawn. Yet even they would struggle to control him. Anakin had become something more than a weapon. His inner conflict, his growing distrust of Sidious, and his desire for ultimate power would make him a dangerous ally. While Sidious and Dooku planned their moves, Anakin would operate outside of their strictures, acting on his own, and often against their will. He would carry out their orders when it suited him, but would also go rogue when his desires for power and control overpowered his loyalty to their cause. The galaxy would begin to feel the effects of Anakin's rampage. Political leaders, military commanders, and Jedi generals would fall one by one, their deaths framed as casualties of the war. But in truth, they would be the result of Anakin's shadowy influence. His presence would be felt in every corner of the galaxy, but his involvement would be masked by the chaos of the Clone Wars. The Republic, already struggling to maintain order, would now find itself battling a foe who could not be tracked, a ghost who left no trace of his involvement. The Separatists, too, would be caught in the crossfire, as Anakin's hand struck down not only Republic leaders, but also key figures within the Separatist alliance. The Jedi, unable to stop Anakin, would begin to lose hope. Their connection to the Force, once their greatest strength, now seemed useless in the face of a darkness they could not touch. The legends surrounding Anakin would only grow, as each new report of his destructive actions would leave the Jedi stunned and unsure of what to do next. The balance of the galaxy, once so carefully maintained, was slipping away, and Anakin's name would become synonymous with fear, destruction, and loss. He would no longer be the hero of the Republic, but rather a figure of legend, a terrifying force that could not be contained. For Anakin, this growing isolation would take its toll. As he moved through the galaxy, unseen and unknowable, he would begin to feel the weight of his choices. His descent into darkness had been gradual, but now it was all-consuming. He had chosen power over everything else, over love, over loyalty, over the hope that he could somehow save the galaxy. The man he had been, the young Jedi who had dreamed of peace, was lost forever, replaced by a Sith who sought to impose his will on the galaxy. His obsession with controlling Padmé, with protecting her from death, had led him down a path from which there was no return. She had become a symbol of his need for control, and in trying to save her, he had destroyed everything he had once held dear. The Jedi, in their failure to track him down, would be forced to confront the fact that their greatest weapon had turned against them. Their own inability to stop Anakin would erode their confidence in their ability to defend the galaxy. The galaxy that had once looked to the Jedi as protectors now began to question whether they were truly the guardians of peace, or simply another failed institution unable to stand against the rising darkness. The Clone Wars, once seen as a battle between two opposing forces, now felt like the death knell for the ideals that had once defined the Republic. The dark side had risen, and no one was left to stop it. But the true culmination of Anakin's transformation would come with the execution of Order 66. Sidious, ever the manipulator, would use Anakin as his ultimate weapon in the final phase of his plan to destroy the Jedi. But Anakin would no longer be merely a tool for Sidious. He would be a player in his own right, a dark figure who now sought to reshape the galaxy according to his own desires. When the Order came, Anakin would fulfill his role in the destruction of the Jedi, but he would do so with an air of cold, calculated efficiency. The Jedi who had once seen him as a hero now saw him as their executioner, and they would fall not at the hands of clones, but by Anakin's own. But even as Anakin became the very weapon the Sith had used to destroy the Jedi, he would find himself trapped in a world he had created. He had sought power, but now he was a slave to it. The man he had once been, someone who had hoped for peace, who had loved Padmé, was gone, and in his place was a creature of darkness, consumed by his own need for control. The galaxy would feel the weight of Anakin's betrayal, not just in the fall of the Jedi Order, but in the rise of the Empire, a regime built on fear, oppression, and the Sith's iron grip on power. Padmé, left behind by the man she had once loved, would become a symbol of what Anakin had lost. Her death would be the final tragedy in his long descent, the point of no return. He had sought to save her, but in the end, it was her death that sealed his fate. In his quest for control, he had destroyed everything he had once cherished. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, would become Darth Vader, the enforcer of the Sith, but in this timeline, his story would take on a far darker and more tragic tone. He would never be redeemed, never find the balance he sought. The galaxy would fall to the Sith, and Anakin's name, once full of promise, would become a whispered legend of destruction and loss. He would be a ghost, not a force for good, but a shadow of what he had once been, a warning to all who sought power at the cost of their soul.